Now comes the fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. Hansel and Gretel. Make yourself comfortable. On the edge of a large forest lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and 2 children. The boy's name was Hansel and the girl's name was Gretel. The family had little to eat, and at some point there was not even enough money for their daily bread. The father was very worried. One evening he said to his wife, "How are we going to feed our children if we have nothing ourselves? Where it is darkest, we leave them alone. They can't find their way home and we're rid of them." The father didn't want that because he loved his children. But his wife would not let him rest until he finally agreed. The 2 children had not been able to sleep because they were hungry and had heard everything their stepmother had said. Gretel cried, but Hansel promised her to come up with something. When the parents fell asleep, he crept outside. White pebbles lay in front of the house, glistening in the bright moonlight. Hansel put as many of them in his trouser pockets as could fit. Then he went back to bed quietly. Before sunrise, the stepmother woke the children. "Get up, you slackers, let's go to the forest." She gave them both a piece of bread, then they started walking. On the way, Hansel kept dropping one of the pebbles. When they got deep into the forest, the parents made a fire. The stepmother said, "Lie down and rest. We're going to chop wood in the forest. When we're done, we'll pick you up." Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire and ate their bread. They soon fell asleep. When they woke up it was already night. In the moonlight, however, they were able to follow the trail of white stones well, and by daybreak they arrived at their father's house. The father was very happy to see his children, but the stepmother was angry. At night the children heard her say to the father, "The children have to go. This time we're taking them even deeper into the forest so they don't find their way out again." Out of necessity, the father agreed again. When the parents were asleep, Hansel got up and wanted to sneak out to collect stones again. But this time the stepmother had locked the door. She woke the children early in the morning and gave them both a piece of bread that was even smaller than last time. On the way to the forest, Hansel broke the bread in his trouser pocket and gradually threw all the crumbs behind him. When they were deep in the forest, the parents lit a fire again and left the children alone. At noon Gretel shared her bread with Hansel because he had scattered his. Then they fell asleep. When they woke up it was night. In the moonlight they searched for the trail of breadcrumbs. But they didn't find a single crumb, because the birds had picked them all up. Hansel and Gretel walked all night and the next day but couldn't find their way out of the woods. They were hungry because there was only the berries that grew in the forest to eat. Finally, exhausted, they fell asleep under a tree. It was now 3 days since they left their father's house. They kept walking until suddenly they saw a chimney through the branches. As they drew near, they saw a house made entirely of cakes, with windows made of sugar. Then Hansel and Gretel ran to the house and began to eat greedily. Hansel broke off a piece of gingerbread from the roof and Gretel took a piece from the window pane. Suddenly a fine voice called out from the house, "Crisp, crunch, crunch, who is crunching on my little house?" The children answered, the wind, the heavenly child." And they continued to eat. The door opened and a very old woman came out. Hansel and Gretel were so frightened that they dropped the cake. The old woman said, "Oh, dear children, just come in, I won't hurt you." She took both of them by the hand and went into the little house with them. There she gave them good food, milk and pancakes with sugar, apples and nuts. After that, the siblings got 2 soft, warm beds. Hansel and Gretel felt like they were in heaven. But the old woman only pretended to be friendly. In reality, she was a wicked witch. She had only built the gingerbread house to attract, catch and then eat children. Early in the morning she grabbed Hansel and led him to a small stable. She locked him in there. He screamed and shook the bars, but it didn't help. Then the witch went to Gretel and ordered her, "Cook your brother something good so that he gets fat. And if he's fat, I'll eat him." Gretel cried, but it was no use. She had to do what the witch asked of her. Now the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but stale bread. Every morning the witch went into the stable and told Hansel to put a finger through the bars. The witch had very bad eyesight and wanted to feel if he had put on weight. However, Hansel only stuck out a small chicken bone from her, so the witch thought he was still skinny. This went on for 4 weeks. Then the witch lost patience. She finally wanted to eat him, whether he was fat or not. She went with Gretel to the big oven in front of the house. There the witch said, "First we want to bake bread. Climb into the oven and see if the fire is hot enough." But that was just a ruse to lure Gretel into the oven. Once inside, the witch would close the door and fry Gretel. But Gretel suspected what the witch was up to. She said, "I don't know how to get in there. Can you show me?" Then the witch scolded. "The opening is big enough. Even I can fit in there." And to show Gretel, she climbed into the oven herself. Gretel pushed her in and quickly slammed the oven door. Whoa! The witch started to howl. But it was no use, and she burned up. Gretel ran to Hansel, opened the stable and told what had happened. So they rejoiced and fell into each other's arms. And because they didn't have to be afraid anymore, they went back into the witch's house. There were boxes of pearls and precious stones everywhere, and the children took as many as they could carry. Then they went back through the forest. Soon the forest began to become more familiar to them, and after a while they saw their father's house in the distance. They stormed into the room and threw their arms around their father. He was overjoyed to see his children, for he had not had a happy hour since he left them in the woods. The stepmother had died in the meantime. Hansel and Gretel dumped their bags and dropped the pearls and gems on the floor. All their worries were over and they lived happily ever after. Thank you for listening. I would appreciate a thumbs up and a subscription. Many exciting stories and fairy tales will follow since curious.